Hi, this is Jeremiah Bork, also known as Off to Battle. This is my first anime review of the Mobile Suit Gundam Cucuruz Doan's Island. I'm going to do this in response to still photos that I've taken of the anime. I'm not using any audio. I'm trying to minimize the chances of any sort of strikes. And I want to give my honest opinions about how this went based on the notes that I took while I was watching this. And if you're wondering what my credentials are for commenting on Gundam, I have actually translated a couple of works within the Gundam franchise as manga. One was Astre X, the other one was École du Ciel. This was stuff a long time ago for Tokyopop. And besides that, I've played a lot of video games. I've consumed a lot of media related to Gundam, so I'll recognize a lot of old stuff, but I never actually watched the animated series from 1979. So I never actually watched the original run of this episode in the TV series that's been greatly expanded and made into a full-length movie. So from my notes, I begin with just looking at, well, there were a lot of major explosions pretty quickly, and that's always a good thing. Start with a bang. And you see right away that there are high-quality animation and CG work evident. There's no wasting time, and you see the human face of War for the Fallen very quickly. And that establishes that this is war. It is a smaller piece of a much larger conflict. It establishes the stakes for people who don't know very much about Gundam, which is very important, because a lot of people will have known of Gundam without being very familiar with Gundam. So you're trying to appeal to a lot of people. People with a lot of nostalgia and people with a lot of general distance, arm's length familiarity, but they don't really know a lot of details. So you have theatrics in the human interaction that's going on as a superior is laying down to the captain of the White Base, Noah Bright, and saying that you're going to do this, and you're going to do it here, and no, we can't send anybody else, and you've got to do it. It's very important. And then Bright goes and tells his crew this is an important mission. And it doesn't really matter what he personally thinks, whether he thinks that's true or not, because that's what he has to tell them. And I'm not surprised that once he did this, we get to see an unguarded moment from Bright about being too harsh in front of the troops. Because he himself is putting up a front for people. Because he has to be this way. If he's not this way, even if he goes a little too far at times, he still has to do it because he's still running a military ship in the middle of an actual war. So he has to make things happen for the safety and the continuation of the people under him, or else you're going to have court-martials and all sorts of ugly stuff. So anyway, they are touching down in this scene because mobile suits are not any good in a launch bay. If they have an expectation of trouble, they need to get on the ground right away, and that's a very sound tactical decision. And the thing is that that's not actually how the original episode originally properly went. But that's how we're doing it here. And that puts the Gundam on the ground, and that leads to a cliff confrontation very soon. But between one and the other, we have a comment about konna tokoro de, in a place like this, because this looks like a complete wasteland in darkness. It looks completely uninhabited. There was a tiny lighthouse, and it doesn't look like it's even capable of sustaining human life. But that's not strictly true. So what we have is a confrontation, an ambush. The beam rifle goes over the cliff, and that will be important later in a sense, but basically it's just for me to say that it does happen. So this is basically what I would call the cliff trick. In other words, a greatly inferior mobile suit piloted by somebody who's a very big veteran is defeating the hero by basically having a cliff crumble under him, and, well, you're heading down to your near doom, but not quite, because it turns out that this enemy pilot has spared the protagonist. And now we have the building of the story, and like I said, this is for a lot of people who not only may be familiar with the old stuff, but who have only a paper-thin passing familiarity, if that. So we have the hero tormented by dreams. This is very classical. It's part of the hero's journey sort of drama. And even though that this was considered a more realistic anime and a start of trend of more realistic anime. You're still going to have elements that are very anime like this, but honestly, having parent drama is basically the monomyth, the way stories have been done since time immemorial. So it's all good. It's all good that we have this just to check that off the list, to have that, because he is having dreams. He is going to wake up on this island in the middle of a whole bunch of orphans and one enemy soldier. So we have wonderful background work with the island backdrop, and I just wanted to call attention to it because this is the sort of thing that you should expect from this movie. They really did a good job with this. And I will say that the eyes of children are a very cruel thing. This is not your place. This is conveyed very, very quickly to the protagonist, and he understands that he is in an alien world with people who are not his own, but still, they're children. So he's trying to not really fit in here. He's just trying to get back on mission and not be, well, obviously stranded in enemy territory. The sunset, I will say, very, very nice and more complimentary for the way that this looks, the quality that was put into it. And of course, you have children eating that is very cute. I'll have more. Did I have the picture of that? I'll get that done. Anyway, you have the scene where the trees in the stomach strikes. It's like he doesn't want to eat from the enemy, but then his stomach chimes in and nope, nope. And here we have the Xeon mug. Best dad ever. Okay, okay. So in addition to this, we have coming up a flashback of the Bright Slap, which is one of the best known meme moments of the entire series and franchise. And this comes from the Bright wondering if he was too harsh with the guy, and we have the famous line about, like, even my own father hasn't ever hit me twice. And this is well, I should have hit you more because then you wouldn't have ended up being a wimp like this. Basically. I'm wildly paraphrasing. It's not an exact translation. But I mean, I'm just saying without the line in front of me, it's well known. It's too famous for them to have left it out. So this was probably having everybody in stitches in the Japanese end. So the thing is that we have the meta plot that's been sort of shoehorned into this to justify extending it into a movie length and to have more stuff, including more fights and so on and so forth. We have a reference to Paris burning, and it is an actual direct reference to the Second World War. Hitler wanted Paris to be burned on the way retreating from the Allies coming in for the Normandy invasion, etc., etc. But a general defied his orders, and Paris did not burn. And so we have basically a standoff where one side is like, I have a surprise for you, you'd better stop what you're doing, and then the Federation and the invaders are going, nah. And that's our standoff, that's our setting up of the later conflicts, but at any rate, that's the bigger picture. But what we see from other conflicts in the middle of this is that this Doan guy is a deserter. He's somebody who is considered a traitor to his own kind, to have abandoned the military, even though that he's doing a job for them. He's still considered by the unit that he used to command, a special forces unit, to be a traitor who has abandoned them. So we see that taking the side of orphans in the middle of a shooting war is not a very popular decision with your own kind. So we have to keep that in mind. And after this, we had a lot of stuff about Amuro dealing with the children and the situation, and he starts to, I would say, contribute to the community in very, very, very tiny ways. But he also eventually finds the battle site, and he's reminded rudely of the world that he was dropped out of to find this momentary bit of a sort of peace. Because he's not being shot at, he's not shooting at people. This is strange to him at this point. It's not the life he's known for back-to-back-to-back episodes of the story. And you also see him recoiling from the cliff. He doesn't want to go down there. It's a long way down. But this is, yes, it's physical, but it's also meant to be a philosophical thing. The route back to the life that he knew for the past little while, the war that he knew, it's very treacherous, and he recoils from it, not just physically, but emotionally. And this is very deliberate. So when we get rain right after this, it's like a festival for the children. There are celebrations. People treat it like the arrival of something to, it's basically a party. But something breaks. Now, as expected, Amuro helps on something technical. Now, this is part of his core character. He is the son of a scientist of, well, the guy who basically invented the Gundam, based on capture technology and meshing it with what they had at home, and lots of money and a fair bit of genius. And yes, he was the lead researcher. This was not an uncommon plotline during anime in those times, so that's fine. So the point is that as a teenager, Amuro is very good with technical things. So it doesn't surprise me one little bit that this is how he's helping this community. He finds something to fix, and that's what he's doing here. In this case, it's a pipe. And this makes him, in a sense, part of the community. And that means that he has skin in the game, and he has something to lose. And that's very important for quietly building up the stakes for the later part. So what you see is that with the Federation wanting that ship to get its rear end moving, because there's a big operation that's going to change the tide of the war once it gets fully going, they want that ship with the leader of their military forces on Earth. And we have a wink conspiracy going on to frustrate these plans because they still have to find their god. And this is a bit of a departure because, quite frankly, if the Gundam was what was lost in the original episode, then it might have not gone down this way. They would have placed a much higher priority on getting the Doan back. All the stuff about it being not just it's just a prototype. We have mass production variants now. Yeah, that only became obvious to them later on the ship. Anyway, the point is that it's not exactly how it went down originally. It doesn't have to be. It's just that that mobile suit is still pretty powerful. So it's not just first among equals. No, it's actually superior. The pilot is superior. That's why it's such an important thing. So basically, you'd be having everybody else going to the roadshow except Michael Jackson. No, that's not how it works. But anyway, we have the Winky conspiracy. We have gyros malfunctioning at convenient times. I will say that Bright, he is so good at yelling at people that even when he's doing it completely to troll, nobody can call him on it. Nobody can say that you're just faking that. No, he's too authentic. He's too good at yelling at people. So I wanted to mention just super briefly that when they talk about Fat Uncle, it's actually the enemy forces transport aircraft that's bringing people to the battle site, to this small island. And that's because they have this nuclear missile that they need to have launched because their leader is a maniac. And that means that it has to stop being jammed because Doan is being the little Dutch boy with his finger in the dike. I mean, the actual thing that holds the water back, not the other kind. The point is that the dam, the water break, that sort of thing, the Dutch thing. So anyway, what we have next is the fixing of the lighthouse, which becomes the fateful mistake. There's no way that Amuro could have known that fixing the electricity and going the step further and making the lighthouse work was going to bring enemy forces to their position and endanger the children. But that ends up being what happens. But it's not like he was told the circumstances because Doan didn't say anything about it, so it's not really his fault. It's just that it's still sort of the fateful mistake, the turning point in that plot. And then we go to developments going largely as expected. The old unit comes to settle things once and for all. Amuro obviously needs the Gundam back, so we have this swimming scene where Amuro, who is not an Olympic swimmer, nearly drowns. And this is, musically and visually, it's a respite from the other action. And it gives us a pause, and then we have more explosions, more fighting, more drama building, and this is all leading back to the return of the hero, But that's not really what happens, because we have the return of Doan with his comparatively ancient Zaku fighting against high mobility variants that were created after the original series. So the idea here is just that we get much better fights, and we have all this drama going on, and finally, we get the Gundam coming back. And we get some seriously good-looking Gundam action, Amuro coming back in full form, the return of the hero of sorts. And then we have the GOAT. So let me just get this out of the way. The GOAT is the GOAT. As in greatest of all time, that's going to be my thumbnail. Forgive me, I couldn't help myself. It was just too good. The GOAT is great. The GOAT is the GOAT. So what we have after this is that we have really good Zaku fights, and that's to be expected, but when we have the two-handed use of a heat sword like that, this is to humanize the mobile suits. It reminds people of samurai action, and that's exactly what we're supposed to feel. We're supposed to feel that, like, yes, they're huge robots, but they're also moving somewhat like human beings, except with, hover jets on their feet. So it's the old versus new, the person with principles being fought by the person who has not. And finally it gets to a crisis point, and then we have this scene, which is showing off what a Vulcan does. And a Vulcan, I mean, on the Gundam, it's an anti-aircraft cannon. And the reason that we have Vulcans on planes is because of the whole... This is why we have a Top Gun. As in, yes, those movies. It's because the Americans found out in Vietnam that having only missiles is a bad idea. So they needed to do two things. One of them was training the pilots better. So they had their Top Gun program. The other one was putting 20mm Vulcan autocannons on everything that they put out there as a fighter. And that meant that they had at least one weapon that was useful at point-blank range at, 5 feet to 1,000 meters. Or 1,000 feet, or whatever it was. But the point is that you had something to go at, and they do a really good, faithful sound in this. So what we have here with the head of the new head of the Zeon Special Forces unit, we have a cliff battle. And this brings back the battle Amuro had. It shows that he has learned from his experiences. He has grown as a human being as a result of what has happened to him. And he invites the fight on the cliff. And it's being used precisely because it is a samurai film effect. And even though that we're being suckered in to think of these as almost human beings fighting, then we have the Vulcan that goes out and helps and gets well, I shouldn't spoil everything, but we see that they're still robots, but then we have a lot of fighting, clashes of styles, basically clashes of martial arts, but with robots. And that's why it works in that sense. And then we have this absolutely wonderful big explosion. I mean, it's obvious which side wins in the end, so I'm not spoiling that. So, at any rate, we have this, and then we have the sabotaging of the missiles. Excuse me. I mean, it's one missile that goes up and then splits into 6. So we get 6 explosions, and this is happening in orbit, basically. And then it comes down to, well, Paris isn't burning after all. One guy really did stop it. And this is where I'm just going to explain about why this movie works in a larger sense. Because this is not something the Gundam was involved with. This was essentially, you know how they teach in school about conflicts, man versus man, man versus nature? This is essentially man versus war. And what I mean by that is that you have war as basically a nature unto itself. It's not natural, but it might as well be. It's impersonal, it's large, it grinds people down. No one person can actually stop a war. The most you can do, the absolute most you can do, is for one fleeting moment to kick war between the legs and to make it stop and wince and cringe. And that here is done not by the protagonist, not by the Gundam. Because remember, the beam rifle went over the cliff early in the movie. So he can't do that. And that's something that would have happened if it was later in the original series plotline, because they basically took something that happened later and they crunched it in and made it into one thing. And basically, we're having a what if of basically, it could have happened that way. It's plausible. And that's all we need. That's all we need to do to work with, because we have the characters, we have the motivations, we have the borderline insane enemy commander, the man of culture who also understands the value of culture and therefore seeks to destroy it in order to punish the enemy severely. And then we have the person of principle who is trying to kick war between the legs for one day. But he succeeds. He succeeds. And even though the ending scene, which is per the original series, is the Zaku being thrown over the cliff and sent into the ocean, it was still the right thing to do. Now that there's no more fighting to be had on this island, nobody cares. Everybody has gone off. The war has left it behind. There's only one guy who used to be a soldier and a bunch of orphans who are being taken care of by it. And that's it. That's it. There's nothing else. The protagonist moves on. He has more battles to fight. But this one story within the larger story has come to an end. Therefore, you have stakes, you have people, you have conflicts within the larger conflict, you have a beginning, you have a middle, and you have an end. And what I'm explaining is that as a one-shot movie, I can't have asked for better. They were faithful to the material while still doing essentially a what-if, and they made it entertaining, they made stakes, they resolved things as well as you're going to get any kind of resolution in a situation like this. And basically, you have the GOAT. The GOAT was fantastic. The GOAT starring as himself. So, I think it was himself? Whatever. No, it can't be himself. They milk it. Yeah. I've never raised a goat, so forgive me. The point is that it's a good movie, it's what it's trying to do, and not a lot of movies these days can say that. So, it started out the way it wanted, it was in the middle of the way it wandered a bit, but it was supposed to. And then it ended. It ended with bangs, it ended with a conclusion, it ended with an ending. And I think that by itself is worth praising. So, that's my first anime review. I hope that it was helpful in some way, and it gives you some idea of what was going on, and some context for the Gundam universe in some slight fashion. And this is off to battle, off to the next battle, obviously, because this one is over. Everybody take care, have fun.